Since Christmas falls on a Sunday this year, and our church will be having a candlelight Christmas Eve service instead of our normal Sunday service, today is the Sunday that we celebrate the birth of Jesus and Christmas. And for this year's Christmas message, I am very, very excited to discuss Herod. My recent trip to Israel strongly influenced this message, as you will see. And I also made an interesting discovery concerning Herod that I will share toward the end of my message. And it's at the very end, so stay tuned as you will not want to miss it. Now, if someone mentions Herod, there is a question that you should immediately ask. And does anyone know what that question is?
Which Herod?
Yes, which Herod, okay? Anytime somebody brings up Herod, you immediately want to ask which Herod. You see, the Herodian dynasty contained many men named Herod. There was Herod the Great, there was Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa, and many more Herods. And by the way, I'm probably going to butcher some of these names from 2,000 years ago, but I'm doing my best. We actually don't really know how names were pronounced. For example, we say Caesar today when it's actually Kaiser. So we just go with it. So work with me here. So today, we're specifically going to be talking about Herod the Great. So who was Herod the Great? Is Herod the Great mentioned in the Bible? Yes, he is. But Herod the Great is not a term mentioned in the Bible. So if you want to find him in the Bible and you search for that term, the Great, it's not going to help you at all. And obviously, Great was not his last name. So I believe it was Josephus who actually coined this term, Herod the Great, in part to help with all the confusion with so many different Herods. Now, I think it's likely that a lot of Christians today, they just assume as they're reading the Bible that any mention of Herod is the same person, but that's not the case. This will probably shock you, but there is not one, not two, not three, not four, not five. There are 6 different Herods in the Bible. I did not know that, by the way. Traveling to Israel pays off. You learn new things. So, which one of the 6 Herods in the Bible was Herod the Great? Was it the Herod that Paul almost converted in Acts 26? No, that was Herod Agrippa II. I know. Was it the tyrant ruler in Acts 12 who throws Peter into prison and then kills James before God strikes him down with worms? Is that Herod the Great? No. That was Herod Agrippa I. I know. Do you guys remember how John the Baptist rebuked Herod for taking his brother's wife? Well, those 2 brothers were both named Herod. Surely one of them is Herod the Great. Nope. His brother was Herod Philip, the Tetrarch, and the Herod that John the Baptist was rebuking was Herod Antipas. And by the way, it was Herod Antipas who ended up beheading John the Baptist, and it was also Herod Antipas whom Jesus called a fox. And something you may not know is that Jesus used the feminine form of the word fox. And I will let you draw your own conclusions there. So we're quickly running out of options. How is this Herod so great if we can't even find him? I've got it. Do you remember when Mary and Joseph had baby Jesus and they were returning to Israel, but they feared the man in charge, so they went to Nazareth? That must be Herod the Great. No, that is not Herod the Great. That was Herod Archelaus. Well, that only leaves us with one final Herod in the Bible, and this particular Herod is only mentioned in one story in the Bible, and that is found in Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So it was Herod the Great that wanted to kill baby Jesus, and who asked the wise men to tell him where baby Jesus was so that he could kill him. Now, as you might recall, he lied to the wise men, and he said he wanted to worship Jesus, but he actually wanted to kill him, which is why God told the wise men in a dream not to return to this Herod. And when Herod figured out that the wise men were not going to cooperate, when he figured out they were not going to return and tell him where baby Jesus was, he snapped. He was so upset that he ordered all the baby boys 2 years old and under who were in Bethlehem and the surrounding regions to be put to death. Herod the Great was so bloodthirsty that Mary and Joseph stayed in Egypt with baby Jesus until he died. Imagine moving to another country to get away from someone and just staying there and waiting until they die. Now, if you were to ask people who are familiar with Herod the Great, very familiar with Herod the Great, to describe him in 2 words or less, you would get answers like great king. You would get master builder. You might even just get the word great. Now, I don't know why exactly, but as I was studying and learning more about Herod the Great, I could not get a phrase out of my head. Kids, I want you to pay attention. This is a very technical term. I think Herod the Great was a sick puppy. Can you remember that? Honestly, I could not get that phrase out of my head. If I have to describe Herod the Great in 2 words, I would call him a sick puppy. Now, when I first started looking into this man's life, I noticed something very interesting. This so-called Herod the Great. Whether I was watching a documentary on his life, or reading Wikipedia, or reading online articles, encyclopedias, you name it, they all claimed something. They all said that what is said in the Bible in Matthew chapter 2 about Herod the Great did not happen. They all say it. It's the beginning of every single article about Herod the Great, is that what you read in Matthew chapter 2 did not take place. Now that stood out to me. I think it would stand out to all of us. Time and again, as I was researching him, it was claimed that we know so much about his life. But the one story, the one single story that we have in the Bible in the New Testament, that story was not true. And that story did not happen. Now, when someone discredits the Bible like this, and it's not just, in this instance, one person, it was seemingly everyone, I actually try to not discount that. I don't ignore it. I don't just say, well, I believe the Bible is true, and so therefore they must be wrong. I don't do that. I want to know why. Why are they saying this didn't happen? Literally, what is their reasoning inside? What is the evidence that they are using to come forth and say this event did not happen? Are they saying this because there's contradictory evidence? Or are they saying this because there's a lack of evidence? Or are they saying this because they are looking for any opportunity possible to discredit the Bible? Whatever the answer is, I want to know what that is. I need to know. So I kept this matter in mind as I continued to research Herod the Great. And I want you to stay tuned for an incredible discovery that I made in the process. As I was researching who he was and what he did, I quickly noticed that no one ever claimed how they knew the things they were saying. This was shocking to me, and I probably just missed it because I've never been looking for it. but every single video and every single article that I read talks about Herod the Great, talks about so many things, but they don't say how they know. They just say it, and we all believe it. So for example, one article would say, Herod the Great was born around 72 BC in Idumea, but they wouldn't say how they knew that it was that year and it was in that geographic location. Sometimes they would actually reference a resource. They would quote a book, but that book was just claiming it as well. So I was very surprised that I could learn about a man's entire life. There is so much out there about this man. There's actually way more, they say, way more written about Herod the Great than about Jesus. This is a very significant man in history. But I have zero clue how we got any of the information. I went to online forums and I said, hey, how do we know this about him? And nobody could help me. Now keep in mind, Herod the Great's entire life, his entire life, from birth till death, was lived BC, before Christ. Now, if you want to use BCE, that's fine too, but sometimes I forget what BCE stands for. Never mind, I remember, before the Christian era. So yes, technically this was before the Christian era, as Christ was not born yet. We are talking over 2,000 years ago. How do we know so much about Herod the Great's life? Remember, these are very critical claims being levied against the Bible here. They are saying that the events concerning Herod the Great that are recorded in the Bible did not happen, but all the rest of them did. Yet in my research so far up until this point, which is many hours deep, the Bible is the only historical document that I have found that actually talks about Herod the Great. All the rest is Wikipedia and documentaries. Now, it didn't take me too long, but I finally figured out where we're getting all this information. We're getting it all. All the details of his life were recorded by a man named Josephus. Now, you may recall that Josephus was a first century Jewish historian. He is, I cannot tell you, I can't even overemphasize how important Josephus is when it comes to just history in general, secular history. Now, I've been familiar with Josephus for decades. I remember learning about him early on, but I never have read Josephus. And so if you know me, I'm always up for a challenge. And so if somebody's going to tell me that something in the Bible is not true, let's go. So once I discovered that Josephus is the source for all of these articles, all of the books, all of the documentaries on Herod the Great's life, I went where? Straight to the source. Straight to Josephus. So I began reading Josephus' work called Antiquities of the Jews. When I got the book, I was in for a rude awakening. Over 800 pages long. Fortunately, I'm a digital book guy, and you're about to see exactly why I'm a digital book guy. I was able to search this thick book for the name Herod, so I wouldn't have to read all 800 plus pages to prepare for this sermon. Now, even though that was tremendously helpful, this still was not going to be a cakewalk. My search yielded 1,148 mentions of Herod in this book. Now, that's a tall order, but I was still excited because I want to know why Josephus is trusted, but not Matthew's gospel. That's my goal in this undertaking. Why is Josephus believed on what he says about Herod, but what's written in the Gospel of Matthew is not to be believed? So today you're going to learn a ton of history, specifically on this man, Herod the Great, who he was, where he came from, and most importantly, what he did. So Herod the Great was born around 72 BC. He was an Arab. He was born to Antipater and Cypros, who were both Edomites. This is shocking. His father made him governor over the Galilee region at a very young age. It's debated. I think it was around the age of 25. Becoming a governor at the age of 25, very significant, especially in this time period historically. One of his first acts as governor, almost immediately, was he killed Hezekiah and Hezekiah's band of robbers. Well, I guess that's one way to make an appearance. So Herod came on the scene, and he wanted it to be made known immediately. He wanted to make it clear he was going to be a violent and tyrannical leader. And he succeeded. It did not take very long for the Jews to absolutely fear him. You see, he didn't just kill Hezekiah. He killed Hezekiah without Sanhedrin approval. That's very significant. So the Jews went to Hyrcanus II. He was prior the king of Judea, and he was prior the high priest. And they made their complaint against Herod. He put men to death on his own without Sanhedrin approval. You don't do that. So Hyrcanus concurred. And he essentially said, we can't have some Arab come in here, subvert our entire legal system, and put Jews to death on his own. This is how he started his political career. And so they brought Herod to trial over this matter. And by the way, everyone already feared Herod so much that no one spoke up at the trial. All these people that complained did not bring any accusations against him. That's stunning. Because what was he on trial for? Murder. He's being accused of murder. So a man named Sextus Caesar, who was the cousin of Julius Caesar, he told Hyrcanus to pardon Herod, and therefore he did. At that time, you do what Caesar tells you to do. Now, by the way, I'm going to skip ahead right now with what I'm going to tell you, but it's easier for you to understand it if I say it now. Herod ended up killing Hyrcanus and the Sanhedrin. So these people that are trying him in court, he killed them all. Okay? All right, that happens later, but if I tell you now, it's easier to understand the context of this man. He feared no one. There was no one above him. So the Jews' fear of Herod grew, and 100 Jews got together, and they went to Mark Antony, who was the husband of Cleopatra, and they accused Herod. They went all the way to Mark Antony. That's pretty much at this point in time the very top in the Roman Empire, okay? Now, Antony sided with Herod. At this time, it was mainly due to Antony's friendship with Antipater, which was Herod's father. And so not only did Mark Antony side with Herod, he promoted him. He promoted him to tetrarch. So that was a promotion back then from governor to tetrarch. So now Herod is growing in power over the Jews, even though they all despise him. So then Herod, because of this gift from Antony, Herod befriends Antony, and they become really close. So then, leveraging their friendship, Herod asks Antony to kill Antigonus. Who's Antigonus? Antigonus was a Hasmonean. And Herod feared that if he lived, Antigonus, he might one day convince the Senate to give Herod's kingdom to his sons as opposed to his own if Herod died. So Antony agreed to this. This is crazy. They killed Antigonus. And by the way, if you aren't familiar with the history, the Hasmoneans reigned over Israel for 126 years. So here you have Herod leveraging his friendship with Antony and saying, hey, let's kill this guy. because he's part of the Hasmoneans, and he might one day convince somebody to give what I'm over to his sons as opposed to mine. And he knew what he was doing. He knew that is the last person tied to the Hasmoneans that could make this argument, and had him executed. And by the way, if killing Antigonus was not enough, he also killed the 45 members of Antigonus's party. I'm trying to paint a picture here for you guys of who Herod the Great was. Nice guy, right? Let's keep going. Herod then killed his brother-in-law, Aristobulus III. What did Aristobulus do? Well, he was only 18 years old. So surely he hadn't committed a crime worthy of death by the age of 18. His crime? He was handsome. And he also was of royal blood. So Herod looked at him as a threat by the mere fact that he was handsome and had royal blood. So Herod drowned him at the age of 18. Now, his mother, Aristobulus' mother, Alexandra, was furious, as you can imagine, right? This happening to your 18-year-old son. So she decided to go to Cleopatra. And Cleopatra was also very upset about this. They connected there as mothers. And so she went to her husband, Mark Antony, about this horrific crime. They weren't downplaying this. And so even though Antony and Herod were really, really, really good friends at the time, even Antony agreed that this was a terrible thing. Killing an 18-year-old because you think he's handsome and might one day take the kingdom from your sons. So Antony commanded Herod to travel to Laodicea. He summoned him to stand before these accusations and defend himself if he could. Now, Laodicea is modern-day Turkey. I was actually just in Laodicea this year, and they found a stadium there that they haven't excavated. It's pretty neat. And our guide invited me, just me, to go with him off the beaten path to go look at this stadium. There was like a joke in our group. I was obsessed with hippodromes, which we'll talk about later, and a stadium is like a hippodrome. Unfortunately, when we were crossing the field, it was so dense full of like stickers that I just couldn't go. I couldn't keep going. I had sandals on and I had shorts on. So anyway, that is the city of Laodicea where these events are happening. But I stood in the streets of this exact city. So Herod, being how high up Antony is, sees no way out of this summons. And so he did something important before he left. Let's just say important to Herod. He made a plan with his uncle Joseph, who he believed at the time was the one person he could trust. He told Joseph, if things don't go well with me and Antony, and if I end up getting put to death for what I did, he told Joseph he was to kill his wife. Herod is telling Joseph, kill my wife, Mariamne, if you get word that I'm put to death by Antony. How's that? He said, she's very beautiful, and if I'm put to death, of course she's just going to go marry some other man. Well, Herod could not have that. In his mind, if he could not have her, no one could, not even after his death. So Herod left Jerusalem for Laodicea. He brought gifts. He brought presents to Antony in hopes he could woo him into not punishing him, and this worked. He convinced Antony to not only let him go free, but once again, he established his reign even stronger. So Antony, in response to this stuff, declared that if a king such as Herod the Great is constantly under scrutiny and constantly having to defend their actions, that they're not really even a king at that point. So he said it was his role to just let kings govern as they saw fit. Apparently that includes killing 18-year-olds. and he let Herod return to Judea. Now, while Herod was with Antony, his wife, Mariamne, who was a princess, by the way, under the close watch of Joseph, she got Joseph to tell her the truth about Herod and why she was under his control while he was gone. Now, she was smart. She kept telling Joseph, Herod probably doesn't really love me that much. And he'd say, no, he does. He's obsessed with you. He loves you so much. You're like the greatest person in his life. And she'd say, I just don't know. Do you have any evidence of that? And she just pushed and pushed and pushed. And so Joseph, being a man, if there was ever an epic man fail, it's right here. Listen to this. Joseph thought to himself, I know how to convince her that Herod truly loves her. And he proceeded to tell her, Herod loves you so much that he instructed me to kill you if anything happens to him on his trip with Antony. He was convinced this would show her how much Herod truly loved her. Can't you see his face? He thinks he's so brilliant. I can convince Mariamne. Now, Mariamne, as you can imagine, was horrified at this, right? This wasn't love. This is a sick puppy. Okay? So when Herod returns alive, he expects his wife, Mariamne, to just be so happy that he's back and that he made it and that he's not dead. But she is not. And it comes to Herod's attention that his uncle Joseph and Mariamne spent a lot of time together, and a rumor started that they committed adultery. Now, by the way, that was not true at all. Mariamne was so dedicated. She was as dedicated as a woman could be, even considering this man that she's married to, this horrible person. Now, if you're a woman, I think right now you know exactly, you can relate to the dedication that she had to her husband, okay? Now, this made Herod furious, and he was so upset he actually wanted to kill her over this, but his intense love for her restrained him from doing so. Just a rumor with no evidence. Now, eventually, Mariamne could not take it anymore, and she confronted him to his face, and what she said to me sounds so beautiful. I'm going to read it straight from Josephus. So it's going to sound a little weird, but I think it's beautiful. Here's a quote straight from Josephus. Mariamne said, Yet was not that command thou gavest, that if any harm came to thee from Antony, I, who had been no occasion of it, should perish with thee, a sign of thy love to me? Wow, that's beautiful. That is the question to ask. She's asking him if he really commanded this and if he really expected her to believe that this was a sign of love toward her. Herod immediately knew when she asked this question that Joseph told her, because Herod told no one other than his uncle Joseph about this plan. And so Herod was convinced to himself that Joseph would have never disclosed this to her unless Joseph indeed had what Josephus calls criminal conversation with his wife Mariamne. So Herod immediately put his uncle Joseph to death for doing nothing wrong. Now remember, Joseph was literally just trying to convince Mariamne that Herod loved her. That's it. That's all he did. And Herod killed him for this. What a guy, huh? So a short while later, Cleopatra came on to Herod. Okay? Now it's not clear in the record if this was like a true affection she had for him or if it was just one of her treacherous snares, but Herod did not like her at all. And he came up with what he thought was a brilliant idea in these circumstances because it was clear she was throwing herself at him. Okay? His idea? He wanted to kill her. Surprise, surprise. That's right. Is there anybody that this guy doesn't want to kill? Okay? Now, why did he want to kill Cleopatra? I want you guys to keep something in mind right now, okay? Cleopatra was the highest dignity woman in the entire world at that time. She's at the very, very top. You know why he wanted to kill her? He thought in his mind that he would be doing Antony a favor. So, speaking of man fails, this one that I'm about to tell you takes the cake. I kid you not, his reasoning for wanting to kill Cleopatra was that if she was willing to commit adultery with him against Antony, he would be doing Antony a favor by killing her and ridding him of a wife that was willing to cheat on him. That was his rationale. That was his logic. And he believed it. He was like, this is the greatest idea ever. Imagine that. So all his counsel around him, and I'm talking everybody around him, begged him not to do this. They were like, please don't do this. They're just like, you're insane. Please, what do we have to tell you to not do this? This is not a good idea. This is a horrible idea, and it will not end well. They literally had to convince him that it was a bad idea and that Mark Antony would probably actually be very angry if he killed his wife. Okay? Wow. So, fortunately, they talked him out of this brilliant plan of his, and he didn't do it. So this brings us to the year 31 BC. Remember, the numbers get smaller as we get closer to 0. What happened in 31 BC? The Battle of Actium. This is significant, right? If any of you out there are history buffs, you immediately know what the Battle of Actium is. That's how significant this is. The Battle of Actium was the fight between Octavian and Antony. And the fight was over who was going to take leadership over Rome. Okay? Now Herod had relationships with both men, but he was way closer to Antony, and so he decided, you got to take sides at that point, right? When your two friends are going to war. So he decided he was going to take Antony's side, and not only take his side, he was going to assist him in battle. So he sent Antony supplies, and he literally helped him in his pursuit to kill Octavian. He's like, hey man, I'll do whatever I can with my resources and my power to help you win. And winning means you kill Octavian. Well, Octavian defeated Antony, and therefore also Cleopatra, right? So Antony's dead, Cleopatra's dead, and that victory for Octavian made him the first Roman emperor, number 1, and he became Caesar Augustus. Very significant event in history. So now, with Antony dead and Cleopatra dead, who's in big trouble? Herod. Big trouble. Okay? So what did Herod do? Well, the first thing he did is he looked around Judea for anyone that might possibly, this is hypothetical here, might be a better king or a better candidate for him as king. And he only found one guy. You remember Hyrcanus II? The one-time king of Judea, the one-time high priest? Yeah, Herod put him to death. Why? Because if something happens to him now that he's going to have to face Octavian, he doesn't want there to be an obvious choice for another king other than his own sons. He put him to death for that reason alone. He was literally hoping that if Caesar Augustus realized there was no one else in this region to be king, that might let him go free. That's how sick this guy's thinking was. So Herod killed Hyrcanus, who was one of the last remaining members of the Hasmonean dynasty, and he literally, remember this, okay? Herod could not stand the thought of anyone being king other than himself. And obviously Herod's no dummy. He knows he's going to die one day, and so that's the only time he can consider someone else being king other than him, and at that point, it must be his own sons. No one else. So Herod immediately went to Caesar. Smart move. But before he left Judea, he put his family at Masada. Is there anybody in here familiar with Masada? Couple people? Masada should probably be one of the top ancient wonders of the world. I was fortunate enough to actually visit Masada this past summer, and I can't explain it to you. You cannot comprehend, I'm telling you, you cannot comprehend how this was built over 2,000 years ago. You can't comprehend it. It is a fortress on the top of a mountain next to the Dead Sea. And this is not like a mountain like this. This is a mountain like this, okay? There's only one path to get up to Masada, which is called the snake path. It's literally the only way. Everything else is steep cliffs, instant death. There's only one path to get up there, and that's treacherous as it is. Herod built Masada, okay? He built it by himself right next to the Dead Sea. Now, the reason he built this fortress was because there was only one way up and one way down. And the one way up, the snake path, which by the way, well, it doesn't matter. The snake path, which you can to this day go up it if you want. Most people take a gondola. Think, how's that? Today, you take a gondola because the snake path is too difficult, and that was the only path to somehow build this fortress on the top of this mountain. And it was so easy to defend because the enemy would have to go up the snake path, and then you would just kill them. So, Herod put his family at Masada. He built Masada specifically for this purpose, by the way. He knew he had a ton of enemies due to his tyrannical reign, and he knew that he might need to protect himself and his family one day. Well, now was that time. But guess who he didn't put in Masada? Mariamne. He did not put his beloved wife, Mariamne, at Masada, the best place to protect yourself. While the rest of his family was protected at Masada, he put Mariamne at Alexandrium. Alexandrium was also built by Herod, but Alexandrium was essentially a prison. It was a prison for his political opponents. And so why did he put Mariamne there? Well, once again, to kill her in case something happened to him and in case he was put to death. So he instructed her guard to immediately kill her if the guard received word that his life had ended. So when Herod got to Caesar Augustus, he decided to be brutally honest with him, and he admitted how close he was to Antony, and he admitted that he actually aided him in the Battle of Actium. Now, by the way, this is probably brilliant on his part in hindsight. Herod went one step further and told Octavian to his face that he did not help Antony enough and regretted not helping him more. Do you realize what he's saying? He's saying, had I helped my friend Antony more, he may have killed you, Octavian, and we wouldn't be standing here in this situation. Now, Herod, at this point, thinks he's a goner, but he's taking comfort in the fact that his family is protected at Masada, and he was taking comfort, as sick as this is, that no one would ever have his wife, Mariamne, after his death. In one final last-ditch effort, he probably is imagining he's about to be killed, Herod bowed the knee to Octavian, and he said, "If you allow it, I will show you the same dedication and the same friendship that I gave Antony." Octavian was so impressed with Herod's offer and his honesty that he accepted it. Wow. Caesar Augustus knew that he needed loyalty if he was going to succeed in leading Rome, and he believed that this was the exact type of loyalty that he needed from Herod. So Herod, once again, this guy, it's crazy, right? Once again, he returns to Judea victorious. But once again, Mariamne got the guard to admit to her why Herod put her there, right? This one's obvious, right? Why am I here and the rest of the family's over there? Like my kids and everybody, and the other wives, they're all over there. Why am I here by myself? Okay? So when he returned victorious and she was not happy to see him, he found out that the guard told her the truth. And once again, he became convinced that his wife must have committed adultery with the guard, and he immediately executed the guard, his own guard. But then he's getting worse. He then became extremely angry with his own wife and put her on trial for adultery. no evidence, going to trial for adultery. Can you imagine this? She's done nothing wrong. She's literally in a prison. Alexandria was essentially a prison. She's in a prison by herself, separated from her family, with the guard being told to execute her if he dies. And she's upset about this, and that's all she's done wrong? So he's going to accuse her of adultery? Again, there was no evidence, okay? Now, at the trial in court, everyone in the court, they all lived in absolute fear of Herod. And so they were all telling themselves, if we don't convict her, he's going to kill us. So they convicted her of adultery and executed her. Executed his wife, Mariamne. Shortly thereafter, Herod killed Alexandra, which was the daughter of Hyrcanus. She did nothing wrong, but she was the last remaining kindred of Hyrcanus. And this was kind of his last act to make him feel invincible, and that the kingdom was now completely his, and that there was no argument anybody could ever make to take it away from him and his sons. Shortly thereafter, Herod started killing his best friends. He killed Costobarus, Lysimachus, Gadius, Dositheus. Why? I don't know, because he's Herod. We don't know. He just started killing his best friends. Herod would torture women to get information out of them. Herod put spies among the people. Imagine having this government job. He put spies among the people in order to hear what the people were saying about Herod behind his back, and if anyone spoke out against him, he put them to death. Not only that, but Herod would actually go out at night. He would go only at night. He would wear a disguise, and he would start asking people, what do you think of Herod? And it was Herod. And if they spoke negative, he would execute them. This is a very evil man. So essentially, he tried to make it so that everyone even feared saying anything negative about him whatsoever. It was never safe to say anything negative about him, to be honest about him, because you might be talking to one of his spies and you might end up executed. That's intense. Now, these poor kids up here, they're looking at each other like, I thought he was going to talk about baby Jesus. I am going to talk about baby Jesus pretty soon, but we needed some historical context so I could really drive my point home. So just a few more historical facts about Herod the Great, as if this wasn't enough already. Herod had two sons with Mariamne, Alexander and Aristobulus IV. Now, these two sons were supposed to be his successors, but they were upset. Why were they upset? Well, because he killed their mom. So you can kind of get that, right? Dad, you killed mom. We were upset about this. So he executed them. He killed his two sons from his favorite wife, the two sons that he wanted to give his kingdom to, because they were upset that he killed his mom. They were supposed to inherit the throne. So, and by the way, if you go research anybody that is an expert on Herod, that was his favorite wife, and those were his favorite two sons. Oh, favorite wife? Sorry, I forgot to mention. He had 10 wives, including Mariamne, who's now deceased. So at this time, he has 9. And one of either one or two of his final wives was his niece, FYI. So now Josephus talks about a sect of Jews, a specific sect who existed at that time. And what were they known for? They were known for rejecting giving goodwill to Caesar. This is kind of cool. The majority of the Jews just went along with it, but this growing sect were like, no, we're not going to give goodwill to Caesar. Any idea what they were called? The Pharisees. This is the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees numbered about 6,000 at this time, and some of them started prophesying that Herod's government would soon cease, and not only that his posterity would refrain from retaining it. Whew! I'm sure you already see where this is going. Herod killed him. So Herod had the Pharisees that were prophesying this killed, but not only that, it gets worse. He went to his own family members. Keep in mind, he's got a gigantic family at this time. Many wives, many children, many grandchildren. He put to death his own family members who vocalized that they believed the prophecy. All they did was believe it, which is not that hard to believe, considering how terrible this man is. And his own family members that believed the prophecy, he executed them. Now, this really upset his son, Antipater II. This is his son from his first wife, Doris. At this point, this is the guy left who's next in line to rule after Herod's death, because both of Mariamne's sons he executed. So Antipater II was so fed up with his own father's murderous ways, he decided to kill him. He decided to kill his own father. Now, normally, it would be hard to comprehend a son wanting to kill their own father, but I think you can actually see why in this case, yeah? So at this point, Josephus tells us that Herod is 70 years old, and he becomes ill. Now, nothing can cure his illness. They try all sorts of things, including the Dead Sea. And all these physicians, nothing they try, nothing they do helps him. And so Herod was like, okay, I see the end of the road. I see where this is going. And so he made a will, and he bequeathed his kingdom to his son Herod Antipas. Just to bring things full circle here, Herod Antipas is the Herod in the Bible that beheads John the Baptist, and he's the Herod who Pontius Pilate sent Jesus to before receiving Jesus back from him and sentencing him to death. Now, by the way, before Herod died, which is now going to be within probably a couple years, he actually changed his mind, and he made his son Archelaus ethnarch of Judea. He demoted Antipas to tetrarch. And by the way, that fits the biblical narrative perfectly, as you'll see shortly. So, since Herod fell gravely ill, there were some Jews that thought, oh, this is an advantageous time to do things against this man that we hate. And so they said, let's go tear down some of his monuments that they looked at as impieties. They looked at as offensive to the God of Israel. And so they believed that they could do this, and Herod would not be able to punish them because he was essentially bedridden with this illness. But Herod actually became worse as a person as he fell ill, if you can believe this. I know this sounds strange, right? How could Herod become worse? Well, this sickness that he had, which is still talked about today in the medical profession, Herod's sickness, made him mad. It drove him mad. And so what did he do? He actually went on a murderous tirade for the last year or so of his life. He was able to continue to kill people he did not like, even in the state of being bedridden. So the Jews that were defacing his monuments, he put them to death. Now, this is very significant, very significant. Hopefully you guys get goosebumps when I tell you this. I'm going to tell you why. The leader of the group that he put to death was a man named Matthias. And Josephus records that the same night that Herod put Matthias to death, there was an eclipse of the moon. I just got chills. That is what we would call a lunar eclipse today. Why is this important? Well, this helps us know the approximate time that Jesus was born. Isn't that cool? We can use modern day technology. We can rewind the solar system, if you will, and we can know the exact day that lunar eclipse happened, the exact day. It either happened on March 13th, 4 BC, or December 29th, 1 AD. Those are the only two lunar eclipses that happened near the end of Herod's life. Super cool. An exact date. I love it. So Herod is very ill, and he puts to death Matthias and his group for defacing his monuments. And for Herod's final act, ready for this? Since he knew that he was going to die from this disease, he didn't know when, he knew he was going to die from this disease, he started to realize something. He started to realize the Jews will not mourn when I die. Surprise, surprise. He was so full of himself. This is how full of himself he was. He strongly believed that the people should mourn his death more than anyone had ever mourned a king's death ever. That's what he believed about himself. So he came up with a plan, this is horrid, to force the Jews to mourn for him. He commanded the entire Jewish nation to come to him. And everyone knew he was ill, right? So to deter them from just ignoring him like, you're sick in bed, what can you do? He made it punishable by death to ignore the command to travel to him. And so as the Jews started coming to him from all over the country, he put them in a hippodrome. Remember hippodromes? A hippodrome was a large ancient Greek stadium that was built specifically for chariot races, for horse races, okay? I've been inside a hippodrome in Israel. I've walked inside the hippodrome. They're massive, okay? They could hold tens of thousands of people. So as families entered the hippodrome, Herod put soldiers around it so that no one could get out. And here was his command. He said, as soon as I'm about to die, send the soldiers in and kill one person from every single Jewish family. Doesn't matter who. Just kill one person in the family. Could be a child, could be the dad, the mom, the teenager, doesn't matter. Kill one person of every family. And that will cause every family in Judea to be mourning upon my death. And it will then be known that the entire nation mourned after my death. Sick, right? So sometime later, essentially on his deathbed, Herod actually was able to put to death one more of his sons. And this was Antipater II, the son of his first wife, Doris. But by the way, he ended up finding out that his son was plotting to kill him. And on his deathbed, literally 5 days before he died, he had his son executed for that, for plotting to kill him. So Herod dies 5 days later. Now, I have some really good news for everybody. Thank you, Will. Finally, some good news. Herod's sister Salome had somewhat of a heart. It's hard to say that because she kind of supported him. They were tight. They were tight brother and sister. She supported him his whole life. She had somewhat of a heart, and she released everyone in the hippodrome and told the soldiers, don't kill anybody. She argued, he's dead, he'll never know. Thank you. So they were all spared. Now, keep something in mind. When I returned from Israel this year, and having just visited many great works of Herod the Great, I wanted to research this man's history. You can't go to Israel and leave not wanting to research Herod the Great. I think it's impossible. And the first thing I read was that the biblical narrative concerning him is not true, but that everything else is true. Please open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to read about the birth of Jesus, but now you have historical context behind these events. I'm excited because whenever you hear me use the phrase, the Bible comes alive, you are about to experience an occasion of that right now. Let's begin with verse 1 of Matthew 2. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, that's Herod the Great, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Believable? Absolutely. And when he gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. Believable? When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead. Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. Doesn't it help tremendously to have the background of Herod's life when you read this? Doesn't this passage just come alive in a new way? Wow. Now I want you guys to ask yourself a question. Was that story that I just read, was that believable at all to you? Now that you know the story of Herod's life and how he ruled, does this fit at all? Of course it does, right? The incredible discovery I made in researching Herod the Great is that the biblical narrative fits perfectly with his life. His story actually makes the Gospels make more sense. I can't find any good reason why the so-called experts discount Matthew's Gospel. They consider Josephus' Gospel concerning Herod's life, and I don't think there's an argument. This is the big reveal here. If they say Matthew's Gospel was not an eyewitness account, guess what? Neither was Josephus. Josephus was born long after Herod died. If they say Matthew's Gospel was written long after the events, that's what Josephus did. Josephus wrote almost 100 years after the events in Herod the Great's life took place. Now, are they really going to argue that Herod would not put children to death? Are they hoping, I think this might be it, are they hoping that we are simply ignorant of Herod's life? It appears so. So I will finish with this. There was a common theme, as you just heard, and it's way more clear when you read, I don't know how many pages I read, probably 200. When you read 200 pages of Josephus about Herod the Great, what was the common theme in Herod's life? The common theme was his anger at even the thought of anyone else becoming king other than him. So of course he's going to freak out when he hears that someone's been born king of the Jews. And Herod, this is fully documented, went on a murderous rampage toward the end of his life, killing his own son and many men while bedridden from his illness. And not only that, he instructed his people to kill a family member from every family in the region. All of this aligns perfectly with the actions that we just read in Matthew 2. And by the way, I never understood why, in that story, why he didn't just go to Bethlehem. But by the way, if you've been there, Jerusalem and Bethlehem are super close, like super close. I never understood reading Matthew chapter 2. Why is he telling the wise men to go to Bethlehem when it's right down the road and bring back word to him? Now I know. He was gravely ill and couldn't get out of bed. Of course that's why he sent them. It all makes sense. You see, the skeptics want us to doubt God's word, and it was that one statement that the experts don't believe the events in Matthew 2 occurred that led me to dig into exactly why they believed this and what their evidence was. And not only do they not have convincing evidence, the facts support the Bible and give us yet again further evidence of the credibility of the Bible and further reason to believe the Bible is true. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you today and we're just so grateful that we get to celebrate the birth of your Son each year. The fact that Jesus is known for the date of his birth is significant in and of itself. People are never known for the date of their birth because people don't know who someone's going to be until they die. That's why people are known for the date of their death, but Jesus was looked forward to. He was foretold, and that's why he is known for his birth. And I'm just so thankful for your word and for history, and just to be able to go back and understand exactly what was going on during these times and understand the events that transpired were so significant, but so significant that they even affect our lives today. And I'm just thankful for the evidence that continues to show itself that the Bible truly is the Word of God and can lead us in our lives. And we pray this all in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.